So, for several of you, you have already actually started to talk about your pivots. Jonathan, I know that you have already shifted some of your products and how you're producing them, the knitting bowls that you would not, they were like a vanity moment. Oh yeah, sure, Jennifer, whatever with your knitting bowl thing. And then it turned out to be a really interesting, positive piece of your mix of what it is that you're making. Yes, Danny.
I'm not familiar with that story.
You don't know that story?
No.
Oh, well, it's not a story I like to talk about because it's not a project that I'm actually very fascinated with. So the story became that people were coming to the gallery and asking for very specific items. And I was here one day and they said, "You're a potter, you're the person I need to talk to." This lady asked me for a yarn bowl, and I just sighed because this is something I used to work with in Berea College, and it's nobody wants yarn bowls. But as it turns out, that's not the case. It wasn't necessarily that they didn't want yarn bowls, they just didn't have the right marketing strategy for yarn bowls because no one talked about it. Like, so bad that even I don't talk about it at times. And so I humored this customer, and a week later gave her a yarn bowl, and then this person decided to advertise it all over her media sites, mostly Facebook and just for their friends, and I get all these like texts back from an email asking for yarn bowls, and I'm just, oh jeez. Like, cause I have these cool impressionistic stamps that I'm doing, like with these fish bowls and fish mugs. Sure, the numbers don't show that they sell well, but they're great to make. However, these yarn bowls actually turn out to make ends meet for me quite easily, and so I've had to pivot my where I need to do my artwork, and so I went towards yarn bowls, and hopefully I'll get started on that.
Well, and there's something about that too, though, is imagining that the work that you do is really cool and really sculptural and interesting. And I don't know whether that would, I can't imagine that would actually mess up the functionality of a yarn bowl. Mm-hmm. But to have a yarn bowl that also is an art piece and is not just a yarn bowl, maybe then all of a sudden you're getting to do both things, because it just has a little hook in the bowl.
Yeah, I could put the hook anywhere, and it turns out like that hook has been the one thing that really doesn't matter how I do it. I can put it at the top, I can make it like a fish hook and stamp around it. There's a lot of options, and I just don't understand it. I was a food studies major for the college, so I think about how I make it functional for food, and then like it's an atrocity to me when I put a giant hole in it and just say, now put your yarn bowls in there. But we have something called Fiber Frenzy right next to our gallery, and they help me advertise that bowl, despite how much I may not be interested.
So that's a good example, though, of zooming in on something that you didn't know that could become a new piece of your work, and yet it's still your sort of original proposition. It's the bowl. It's just not a bowl that you eat out of. It's a bowl that you knit or crochet or otherwise do things with yarn. So there are a bunch of different kinds of pivots. This is just a small list. For those of you who have either purchased or found online the Lean Startup, there's a whole chapter on pivots, and they go deeply into all of these. Also, if you check out on page 5, you have basically a little bit of a cheat sheet about what these all are. But here's a couple of different ones. Zooming in. So something Eric talked about on the video is imagine that just one portion of what you thought you were doing is actually what you needed to do. So you can not throw away, but you can release yourself from the rest of your projects. This is something that is interesting to me right now because we have a really interesting AIR program, but some of it is complicated, and how do you make it simplified and really hone in on the best parts of it so that you make sure that you're being as impactful as you can be. The other possibility is zooming out and imagining that something actually becomes way bigger than you imagined it was originally. Switching customers. This is what Tim was talking about earlier, as we discovered from customer feedback that A business specialty awards option as a craft was not something that folks were interested in a meaningful way. That was important customer feedback to know that that line was not worth pursuing, whereas some of our wholesale clients were saying, we want more of this other stuff. So customer feedback is really a critical key to this. The needs, here's what you had. Need, different product, bowl, must have hook in it. And then the revenue model. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later today when we start digging into marketing. But pricing is a really important piece for many of us. And figuring out how your revenue actually plays out in reality as opposed to on paper is part of what you're starting to discover. And I know for Tim makes a ton of work and works constantly. So finding that sweet spot of the price point that says, I'm making and I feel good about the amount that I'm making and the price that I can charge feels fair with the amount of time, the product cost, all of those pieces are coming together. But you've talked about this at fairs. You have a great story about the magic number of whether you're above or below $50 and what happens when you change your price and what happens to your sales. So figuring that piece out, maybe something else that you all are discovering. And then distribution. So particularly for Gallery 123, you have basically one distribution model right now called the Gallery, unless you have your other options of website sales and pieces like that. For crafts, we have a couple of different channels that we use because we have a retail operation at the Log House. We now have a very functional website that allows us to sell in a different way, and then we have wholesale channels as well. So getting those mixes right is also a part of what potentially you're looking at and learning from at this moment in time. Does this all make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So we're going to take a little bit of time for you all to help each other think about the pivoting moment that you're in. So you are going to take 5 minutes to write down for yourself in your book. You're on page 6. And just write down the pivots that you think you need to be looking at given what you've been learning in the process. And think about whether these different pivots are possible, whether there's something else. And what do you think you can implement between now and next week in reality? But what will that change for you once you've thought about this pivot? So go ahead and spend 5 minutes writing down for yourself.